Thank you.
And thank you so much for your interest in today's topic, supporting student mental health. We were blown away by the response to this session. I got 93 positive responses, and so I uninvited half of the people. And we're following this session up with 3 more sessions for specific groups. So it's mostly FOM and some library folks here today. FSAS. We're doing FOM tomorrow, and the central services sometime soon, hopefully in December. So if you have any friends or coworkers who couldn't come today, they're welcome to join another session. To find out about that, you can just email Gwen Camden. Okay, so we're going to be tag teaming today's session, and first starting with a very important acknowledgement, and Asma is invited up to give us our traditional welcome.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. I don't know about you, but I want to hibernate so badly. And then I was reminded, I'm a bit jet lagged, that's fine. Let's begin our morning. Thank you for organizing this. Let's begin our morning by acknowledging the traditional lands. Let's acknowledge Kusatsun, the Squamish Nation, and their hereditary chief, Andy Thomas. Let's also acknowledge Lekwungen Songhees Nation and their elected chief, Ron Sam. I'm really thinking about both of those nations lately because of all the construction that's going down in the boathouse and down by Snuffle Island. And thinking about, because I was asking Gwen, I said, what are those people called that you put the dirt in the thing and then you shake it to try to see if you can find anything that's any relevance to the land?
Archaeologists? Archivists?
I don't know. And there were local members that were trained to actually do this. So I was thinking about them as they were getting out of their vehicles, putting on the rain gear, and then they're out there digging up the dirt and putting it in the thing and then shaking it. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that is dedication. Because for me, I know if I dress appropriately, the weather, I should be outside and really clearing my head and getting back in touch with the land rather than thinking about my dad at home right now. One of the things I was, I'm looking around the room and I'm thinking everybody knows who I am. Yeah. Okay, so I'm not going to do that whole introduction thing, acknowledging my name and family and things you all know. But I just wanted to take a moment because I was in New York City this past week, Friday and Saturday, attending a Telenomics, imagining our investing in women, trying to encourage women to get into CEO positions. And one of the things thinking about mental health was part of that, but also talking about, the theme was inclusion. And one of the things that I absolutely loved about that was Ellen Shook started this kind of, I don't want to call it campaign, but she did this YouTube video called Inclusion Starts With I. And it's absolutely fabulous and highly, highly recommended. When I saw that, and it just made me realize what is it about inclusion and how do we be inclusive ourselves? Now, one of the challenges I found with the whole thing was that, well, if we're going to be inclusive with women, we still have to invite men in to be inclusive as well. And it was just that equality piece part of it. But trying not to get off topic, but I was just needing to share this. So ever since I got back, that's one of the things that we're sharing. Inclusive Starts With I. Go on YouTube, watch it. It's a 3.5-minute video. I emailed it to Kyla as soon as I saw it. I was like, oh my gosh, we have to put this in our diversity action plan. And just thinking about that. One of the other things I want to think about is sitting with a group of members, executive members, continuous thinking about their down in Snow Island, and try to get folks to move from their head to their heart, and heart to head. Because sometimes we're so stuck, especially in academic institutions, we get stuck in our head, and we forget about working with our heart. And I know for some students, they get, it's that conflict, trying to figure out what it is. And so I'm looking forward to hearing what this group brings. Thank you so much for letting me come in and do the work. Enjoy the rest of your morning. I can only stay till 9:30. I've got to leave.
Thanks so much, Asma. So, this is our agenda for this next hour and a half-ish. And while you can read that, I'm just going to talk about a couple of these points. So meeting our counselors and the care team, and me. I'm Gwen Camden, Manager of Student Success. I work in student services, been here for a while, love it, and love the team that I have to work with. There are two of them over there. There are counselors, Sarah Chettleborough and Gemma Fraser. Between the two of them, we have a counselor on site 5 days a week, which we're very privileged to have right now. So skipping down to the bottom, we're going to create a safe space for discussion today. So I need to let you know that this session is being recorded. It is not being live streamed, so it's being recorded for our internal use only. It's not going to be shared with any external or any students or anything like that. But I would ask that you please, when we're talking about students, if you could just avoid student names, and if we find that there's anything a little bit sensitive, we can edit it out. So we want you to feel free to ask questions and have conversations. But the more we can have on this video, the better it is as a learning tool for other staff who couldn't attend today. And I forgot to add a bullet to the bottom talking about what's next. So after this session, the conversation about creating safe spaces for students continues. So introduction to the student success team plus care team. We have a group of folks who have been reorged together. So I'm managing accessibility, counseling, financial aid and awards, and I'm working with the care team. So between those services, we're helping to remove barriers for students to education. Yes?
Sorry, what's an academic
Academic
strategist?
strategist. That's something we're introducing this year, as we know that some students have difficulty going.
Something I'm missing urgently. Okay, that's mostly what I was concerned of. Wait, I don't recognize that.
Well, actually, it is something that you should be aware of. Gemma is our academic coach or academic strategist. So what we find that a lot of students go and speak to one of our counselors, but it ends up being stress about school or about exam taking or some of those tools that you need to excel in the classroom. They're not necessarily, they're causing stress, but they're the root of the problem. But we also find there's a lot of students who don't think they need counseling because they're not broken, right? They're not emotionally impacted by what's going on, but they're still struggling. So we have two doors into getting emotional or academic assistance for students. They're basically getting the same service once they hit the chair, but it creates more of an opportunity to reach a broader audience, no matter what their what do you call that, the mental state going into it. Right now, we're looking for the academic strategist to provide service to quite a lot of students. So we're developing workshops, so things that we can reach out to many students all at the same time because they're all struggling with same themed stuff like exam taking or note taking or benchmarking, like those sorts of things. Okay, so introduction to the care team, which is probably one of the most important pieces of today, is the care team it's there to provide staff, faculty, and students with assistance when it's become a little bit more high sensitive need. So we have a care team that's on call 24 hours a day to help with students who are in that acute stage of distress, whether it's mental or physical. It's kind of like the first response on staff team. Kyla McLeod is a member of the care team. She's on call with her phone right there. Sarah is on the care team. I am, and Drana Andrews Brown, who is the manager of student engagement, or student service, student engagement. Thank you. So between the four of us, we're on call 1 week out of the month each. Have I cut everything off that slide? Are we good to go? Okay, so I'm going to invite Sarah to come up and address the next few slides.
Morning. Good morning, Carla. So we thought it might be helpful to give a little context to what is going on within mental health in universities and colleges across Canada, and then also at RRU. So of course, it's a pretty important and prevalent topic. Multiple studies have been done recently since kind of 2015-16 when we've seen a big spike in students needing to access or wanting to access counseling services and dealing with a variety of health issues, both physical but primarily mental health. So what we've seen from some studies is 1 in 5 students are currently dealing with a diagnosable anxiety, depression, or some form of mental illness. 31% of students reported that mental health was affecting their ability to succeed within their academic programs. And some information around when mental health disorders and illness are often diagnosed or first really come to our attention, and 75% of those appear between people aged 18 to 24. So although Royal Roads, we see a variety of ages in our student body, we are seeing younger students on campus, and so this is something that's becoming a little bit more of a focus for us as well. There's also a study done specifically in Ontario, and you'll see some stats there in regards to just over 3 years, some pretty staggering increases in students experiencing anxiety, depression, substance abuse, and suicide attempts. So some pretty serious conversations to be had across all universities in regards to how we best support students with these mental health challenges. And then, let's click here. So at Royal Roads, yes, Marlene.
I'm just wondering if that's because of an increase of reporting, because people are more aware, or there's less stigma about reporting that sort of thing, or the world's gone to hell in a handbasket by 50%.
That's a really great question, and I think that is definitely a piece of it. We're seeing, I think, and Gemma, I think, has seen the same, that we see more students accessing counseling support, feeling comfortable, sharing what they're doing with their friends, and so sometimes we end up having a whole cohort of students come to seek counseling because they're being so open about it, which is really cool to see. On the flip side, I think we are also seeing increasing stress felt by students due to a variety of, whether that's economic reasons. There are some studies that show the demands of being in such a digital world are increasing the stress. Just generational reasons, I think, that are cultural, societal, that have resulted in students sometimes not having the same coping skills and resiliency to handle certain stresses. So I think there's a variety of reasons that we've seen such an increase. I don't know if Gemma or anyone has anything to add to that.
No, I think
That's what. Yeah, great question. Really good question. An important question to talk about. Thank you.
Did you find data for the older, like a mid-career professional in your research when you're doing this? You've got 18 to 24, I believe, is the age range. Did you have something for the mid-career professional?
That's a really good point, and something that we can probably look a little bit more in depth into. These studies tend to focus, they're looking at universities and colleges across Canada, but I think that ultimately results in a focus on a younger age group. So these widespread studies don't have that type of data to the degree that might be useful for us to know at Royal Roads. But maybe Gemma has something to add.
But I have a little piece that might be helpful. There is some research that's been done on older women, so middle-aged women, and actually it's, being a middle-aged woman myself, it's kind of a little bit stressful to hear that suicide rates among middle-aged women is actually, at this point in time, a real concern. So there is some studies, but as we say, most institutions tend to think of higher ed as being for younger people, so that's where most of the stats come from.
So, sorry. No, that's great. Thank you. Jump in anytime. Any other questions or thoughts about the increase in mental health concerns across campuses? Yeah.
I guess I'm just wondering about the third bullet, about the 2/3 identifying as female, and I'm wondering if that's just because of the population we have on campus, because I know that there are some concerns of more male having issues as well. I just don't want to see this as I don't think it's not a male problem. That's, I guess, what I'm trying to make sure that bullet's not saying.
No.
It's just one of those. I think based on our on-campus cohort, we might have maybe a disproportionate.
That's a good question.
But that is kind of thinking that it doesn't?
I think what we were really just capturing is that those 2/3 of students accessing counseling services are women. That's not to say that 2/3 are, they are more likely to have mental
Right,
health
yeah, I just
concerns,
wanted-
more likely to access
I
it
would
at our
just be
campus.
aware that, it would be less likely maybe for some of the males especially on this campus, that they might not ever say it. And so I just want to make sure that's,
And that,
we bring that up.
that's actually one of the really interesting points. I think that is, you highlighted the issue, is that 2/3 of our people coming are women. We know that it's not necessarily that's just because women have more mental health issues. In fact, probably in many respects the opposite, because the men are not coming and talking about what's going on for them. So yeah, I really appreciate you highlighting that to make it helping us
Great.
clear.
Yeah, absolutely. Something we can think about and maybe do some strategic planning on how to outreach more and reduce some of the stigma so that we can encourage men to access counseling, if that is a barrier.
And the cultural aspects, I think they can watch out for.
Absolutely. Yeah, Eva.
Including how the numbers actually match up to our overall student makeup, and maybe the 2/3. We actually have 2/3 female students.
Do we?
Right,
That was
like I
amazing.
don't.
Do
I'm
we?
not totally
Right.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting
I
at.
think it's like 60, like almost 60% female overall. I remember from enrollment meetings. So that might be just more representative of our actual student makeup
Our student body.
than anything else. So.
And do you have an idea of the proportion of online versus on-campus students that are accessing?
We do actually, yeah. We can maybe just go through this slide. So that second bullet there, we see about 50% of the students that are accessing counseling. It's okay, don't worry, we hadn't gotten to it yet. So it is about 50-50, which is interesting, I think, to think about as well, because we know that there are more students in blended programs, although they may have additional external resources for support and counseling than our on-campus students who may be, we might be the only option for them. Tanya, yeah.
I'm just wondering whether you see potentially more international students coming to you because the transition to living in a different country kind of adds to their stress.
Yes, and I actually have noticed that shift since I went away on mat leave and came back. I see that we have several more international students proportionally accessing counseling services, which I'm really happy to see because I think they are facing some of the most significant stress in transitioning to a new country and not having their supports around them like they would at home. So I think that that is demonstrating that we are connecting with them, and hopefully that some of the stigma attached and cultural complications around accessing counseling we're making some headway in that direction. I still think it's not, and that would be a good statistic to pull up too, is what proportion of students are international students accessing our services. It's still definitely lower than domestic students, for sure.
Do we have any male counsellors? I mean, speaking to Ryan's point, is there ability for male students in distress to potentially go to a male counsellor if culturally they're not happy with seeing a female counsellor?
Yeah, we don't on staff who are currently on contract, but it's something that we have definitely discussed and it's on our radar, and we do have, I think, both people we can draw on within the community if that does come up as something, as an issue or something that a student requests. But visually I can see it may be something helpful, and Gwen has something to add.
Thank you. Students who are members of the RUSA, as part of their benefits package of what they pay for through their health plan, they have access to a counseling system outside of Royal Roads, which addresses different languages, different times of day, and male, female members of counselors that they can talk to. But that's only available to students who are members of the RUSA, as the Undergraduate Student Association.
And that's a 24-hour service as well, which is really fabulous for our undergrad students. Yeah.
Going back to that second bullet, I'm sure that some of the students in the blended programs do have other resources, but I wonder if that's also indicative of, and you would know better, your efforts, but is this because you're more visible to the on-campus students as opposed to those that are online? Because
I know myself too, with students that are online, it's easier for them to hide, right? And do they actually, especially if they're taking a fully online program, do they actually think that, oh, these resources are available to me? Because of course you have a great website, but you have to be intentionally looking for it, right? And so one thing I wondered is there an opportunity to maybe do a video or something that is embedded in the first online course? You know, things to look out for even with your peers, because I know sometimes we're made aware that there's a student in distress from another student where they're like, I've been working with them online and there's a potential issue here. So that's, when I look at that bullet, I think, is it because, you know, we're more visible, we're going into the classrooms more, that kind of thing, and what efforts can we do to try and get you more visible in the online world too?
Yeah, great observation, and I think there's definitely some accuracy to that. We do really make an effort. Any workshop we offer on campus, we make sure we offer it online and try to communicate through our student services newsletters, social media, to really highlight that we have this service and we offer counseling over Skype and over phone. But I think you're right, just that visibility day to day, there are opportunities to do more, and we do have on our radar for over the next few months to put together some more resources and videos and try and even make some static versions of workshops around topics like managing anxiety and building resilience, so that there's more opportunity for our blended and online students to really dig into some of this content and build some more awareness around what supports are available. Great point. So many good ideas and discussion. This is fabulous. Asma.
I was just curious about, because you have approximately 2/3 of students accessing counseling identify as female, but what about other? If you have male and female, is there other for the LGBTQ?
Yeah, honestly, we use a very basic Excel spreadsheet right now to try and track our students, where we would like to have some kind of case management software tool to be capturing data more effectively. So I think we definitely, could just informally be tracking that, and I think we would. This is just currently what we have had in terms of, this is just looking over the last year or two of our stats. So yeah, thanks, Asma, though. We can maybe build some awareness around that. Any other thoughts or comments about this? So that last bullet point there, we just wanted to highlight what we see as some of the primary issues that students are coming to counseling to seek some help for. So anxiety and stress, I think, by far is the majority and number one. And then after that, academic challenges, depression, isolation, sadness, and anything related to relationships or interpersonal. So sometimes that's within the cohort, within their families, romantic relationships, teams, of course, also comes up. So that's the primary issues that we see students come to us with, although there are, of course, some other ones as well. Thoughts or comments on that?
I'm thinking in terms of preparedness to take a program. We have approximately 10% attrition.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if there's anything available for people to either prepare themselves or to be prepared knowing that they can access services, limited services, right? It's so prevalent in society now, 1 in 5, if you're talking about your statistics, that we can't exclude 1 in 5 people because of those issues in your last bullet. So I guess I'm getting at that delicate dance that we have in preparing students to attend school. You know what I'm getting at? I mean, how can we encourage them but not over-encourage them if they're really, truly not prepared?
Ready.
Or scare them.
Yeah,
Or scare them.
Or scare them, right. That is a big topic for us too, is how do we help students understand when they are not ready or this is not the right time for them to be in school, because sometimes that is truly in their best interest. And we have such fabulous, dedicated, determined students that sometimes it's very hard for them to accept or see that. So it is an ongoing fine balance of supporting them, providing them with the right tools and strategies, but also sometimes having some pretty difficult conversations and kind of, okay, plan B, what can we do over the next year to help you be ready to come back and try this again? Is that,
Even before that?
like in terms of preparation?
Days when they're having that discussion? I guess I'm wondering how involved the admissions people are in preparing this.
So in an ideal world, what we would love, in an ideal world, 100% on board with you, we would love for students to sort of self-identify as having some, barriers or some challenges that they might foresee themselves having, and then before they come to the program, connect with accessibility services to see what supports we can put in place. That would be the ideal situation. The greater reality is they come in and start really eager, really optimistic, doing really well, and then things crash, and then they connect with accessibility services or counselling when they're in crisis. And it's much more difficult to pick someone up from crisis mode and get them back on track to being successful than it is to say from the beginning, what do you need to continue to be successful in your life? What do you need to continue? What supports do you need to flourish in this environment? That's easier to do, but it's difficult getting the messages out to people at the right time and when they're ready to hear it as well. So yeah, we could probably do a better job of it, but it's something that
They really don't know until they're in the trenches.
Yeah, they're not.
We don't.
They think they can do it, and then they get to some breaking point, and it may not be until, the third or fourth term in.
Yeah, true, right? It's difficult. And then they reach out for support, and then we can work with them, which is great.
It'd be great if you could have like a survey tool, where they do a survey as part of their acceptance into the program. And depending on what they select, you have a little message saying, we have support services available to help you with your academic success. Please contact us.
But then they have to self-identify.
Well, absolutely, but that's it gets them thinking about
Often
these
they don't,
things.
is what I'm saying.
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
I mean, you can want them to self-identify all you like, but often they're not going to self-identify.
Oh, absolutely.
For a wide variety of reasons that you can't do anything.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. I just think it might highlight some of the things that they're not thinking of to prepare themselves.
And again, that balance between not creating more barriers to people accessing education or opportunities for any discrimination, but also just wanting to do it from a supportive
Exactly.
nature.
And making it like a positive message, like, woo, we have something for you.
Yeah.
Or time that we don't. There's some barriers we can't
Yeah.
remove.
Yeah.
Just a question before was about whether or not the counseling service is identified anywhere, and I just looked on the Launchpad course, which is every student does get a Launchpad course, and that's supposed to introduce them to Moodle activities as well as other stuff, and there is a section on there regarding counseling. So every student does get some information.
Right.
Hopefully, if they go through the Launchpad course, they will. But again, it just comes back to self-identifying, and even when they read it the first time, they scan over it because there's a million things that they're trying to learn. So maybe, hopefully, it'll register when they need it, but it's there anyway.
Thank you. Tanya, did you?
Yeah, I think the preparedness is very relevant, especially for the undergraduate international students that have never left their country and they come here. They really don't know what to expect. It would be great if we could put together some sort of a video, maybe put together by a student who's lived it, to show them what it's like to stay in a homestay, to show them what it's like to do all the day-to-day stuff that they would have to do here and what the culture's like here in Canada, just to kind of give them a bit of insight. And it's not just for the students either, it's as much for the parents as well, because I think the parents and the agents are kind of forcing the children to take certain paths. And they're very unaware of what's to come, and I think better awareness from that very early stage would really help making the right decision.
Okay. Oh, I think some good ideas. There was someone else that I
In our school, we've got, on top of the Launchpad, we've got the link, and in there they have a checklist where they have to complete the link, and this happens before they start their first online course. One of the things they have to do is to go to some student services videos and resources and check that they've looked at them. And then in addition to that, we had a crisis in one of our programs, and somebody from student services emailed us and says, we're just going to send out a general email to everyone in your cohort, and we're not even going to say it's related to the crisis, but it'll just remind them that we're there. And it just made me think that maybe every couple of courses I could send out an email reminding people of some of the services, not necessarily just saying counseling, but all of this and accessibility and that sort of thing.
I think that's a great point, and there's opportunities to think about each program, where are those peak stress points as well, and really try and work together to send those reminders, or we're working on a bit of a workshop schedule for kind of January to sometime in the spring, in the new year, and we'd like to connect with all the programs about here are the dates and times, and maybe there's opportunities to send some reminders at strategic points, or even step into a program and provide a targeted session. So I love that, Marlene. I think there is more opportunity to think strategically about when we remind students of our services, because I think, like Douglas mentioned early on, sometimes it's just overwhelming and it's too much information, whereas they're much more likely to hear it when they need it and know the context. Good points. Any other thoughts, suggestions? No. Some of you might have seen this before in our, we did some workshops on supporting students who are experiencing distress, and this kind of cool Wi-Fi shape comes from a collaboration between the Canadian Mental Health Association and the Canadian Association of Colleges and University Student Services. And what it basically is doing is creating a framework for universities and colleges to think about how we support mental health on campuses. And there's been a real push, I think, at the provincial and federal level for every college and university to have a mental health strategy. And so we've seen over the last few years several schools do this, and something that Kyla and Gwen are currently leading is developing one for Royal Roads. So that's that kind of top little line there, the light green, regarding systems, policies, and what we can do to support mental health, a healthy environment for all students. And as we go down, we see the environment, and then I think part of what our purpose today is to be really highlighting mental health awareness and having a space to have a conversation about what is going on and how we are supporting students, and increasing capacity to respond to students who may be experiencing some form of mental health challenges. And so we're going to get to that shortly, and Gemma's going to take you through some strategies on how to respond to students. And then as we go down, we're getting more into what we do within counseling services. So that's really that mental health support and some crisis management like our care team does, and beyond that, external referrals as well. So often at that lower point, we're getting to a situation where students maybe need to be referred to a hospital or psychologist, psychiatrist. So we can kind of see how that funnels down. And what we're really trying to focus is more on that top level, how we can create healthier environments through the development of this mental health strategy. Questions, comments about that? All right. So before we get into some recommendations for responding to students who you may be worried about, we wanted to think about that kind of higher level. How do we show care for students at Royal Roads? How are we creating a healthy environment? And through the development of a workshop that Gemma and I recently did on building resilience, we identified these foundational components of what we think help students to be resilient and to start with a strong foundation of wellness. And so we have these 4 pillars here, one being mindset, which is very focused on attitude, ability to deal with failure, ability to think optimistically. So that's a lot of what I think we do in our counseling office is have conversations around mindset and approach to life and approach to challenges. Energy, under that we consider things like physical health. So are you sleeping enough? Are you eating well? Are you getting exercise? Are you practicing some mindfulness? How are you managing your anxiety, whether it's low energy or high energy? So anxiety or maybe more symptoms of depression. And then over in the top green one, relationships. So we know that students do best when they feel connected, they feel a sense of belonging, and they have a support system. They have friends, they have relationships with faculty, with staff, with their colleagues in the class. And then purpose or future orientation. We know that's really important too for wellness and for resilience, is having a goal, being determined, having a clear idea of where you're going. And so that's a really fantastic environment that we're in, because students are often in a point of transition, identifying new goals for their future. So we wanted to take just a few minutes to give you an opportunity to maybe discuss with the people around you, 1 or 2, 3 people, a little bit about where you see you as staff and faculty contributing to this culture of wellness, of a foundation of resilience for students. So like I mentioned, I do think we as counselors spend a lot of time in the mindset and energy space, but I think relationships and that future orientation, those are areas that you have a lot of ability to empower students and to support students. So if you could just take a few minutes, discuss some ideas, and then we will try and capture some of those, and we're going to build on that for our next workshop, which is going to be really more focused on creating healthy learning environments. Questions? Good. All right, if you could wind up your conversations. Yeah, that'd be great, and then we can just collect. Sorry to interrupt your great conversations. If we could just reconnect and hear a few of the ideas that you've been discussing. Gwen's going to try and capture a few, and then if you have written them down and you're comfortable to maybe stick them on that white or the flip chart on your way out this morning, that would be great too, because we will be building more on this. But what were some of the conversations you had?
Yeah. I'll start off. We were talking about, my observation was that most people here, at first in my brain I was thinking, well, I'm on the front line. But you know what? Almost every one of us in this room are on the front line because we all deal with students in various aspects. And so it's false to say that Help Desk does any more than anybody else. The library, all of us are probably dealing with students on a different level, faculty people as well. So I think what one of the things that would be helpful to us would be maybe something like a cheat sheet or a card that we can have with us that would give us the emergency numbers to call if we needed to, or if we, and the different levels, so the roles, like the counseling roles and all the different levels, with a number that we would know that we could refer them to say, you know, oh, okay, you know, I'm dealing with you and I think you really could use a counselor, or may I suggest this person, or if we're not comfortable, we could come to you guys and say, look, I was dealing with this student and I really think she could use extra care or extra help. You know, can you help us, or should you contact this person, or something like that. But if we know who to talk to and we have the numbers handy, it might be easier for us to be able to refer people in the right direction.
We're really efficient.
One other thing we came up with was that we were thinking of maybe something that also helps us. I should look at this first. No. So something that would help us see levels, or help us to analyze or recognize what level of student is at. We were saying like yellow, red, green, you know, so like I'm ready to commit suicide level, or I go home and kick my cat every night level, like somewhere where we can, where we can recognize some of them. And we know, Willem had a good point, we're thinking linear, and it's not linear. We can't, there's no checklist that we can go, oh yeah, okay, that's right. But something that gives us an idea that we can, so when we're talking to someone, we can say, okay, no, here's the trigger words, or here's something that we think, you know, maybe they've moved into this danger zone that we need to sort of flag.
Perfect. You've just set Gemma up for what she's going to talk about. So we're going to talk about those different levels of distress and then how to respond to students. And you have received a little cheat sheet in terms of how to respond, so signs and symptoms, and also the contact information. So any other, Teresa?
Well, we talked about in the School of Tourism and Hospitality Management, and we feel that we're pretty strong on the goal, purpose, future orientation discussions with students. We have that immediately. We meet with all of our students one-on-one and constantly are in that sort of, even if you don't know where you're going, let's have that conversation about what are the possibilities. So we think that really helps. And we really work hard on the relationship side as well, which really came to light as a result recently with a student who was in an emergency situation, and she felt very comfortable going to her instructors and felt very comfortable going to me as program head, and felt very comfortable working with our program associates as well to get the help that she needed. But I think what we're sort of identifying with this 4 model that you've got here is that the energy piece we could really help with. We have to try and find a way to do that. Food, exercise. We've got there are 75 students in my program alone, and I'm only one of several. So the numbers are a challenge, but certainly I think that's an area that we could help with. And as well, we were just talking about international students who come here whose culture back home is where privacy doesn't exist. And so they get scared about going to counselors because they're afraid that it will impact their mark and their instructors will know, and they get scared that other people will know. And so we just identified maybe there's something we can do in our foundation week or a welcome week that we have every year. We can try to students to talk to them about privacy law in Canada, really what that means for them.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And that can be an ongoing conversation too, right? And it's wonderful to hear how I think the relationships you've built, because you care so much about their future and helping support them through the process, that's building that trust and rapport. And those conversations can really mean a lot when they're coming after that stage too, in addition to something in the forefront, an early part of their program.
In regards to relationships, we talked about the cohort model and how that has a lot of benefits, but it can also be limiting. And with my BA students, I have 2 on-campus groups, and so in the last year and a bit, we've really been encouraging to build relationships within both cohorts, and we saw that really did strengthen them. That's the communication students, and of course they've had quite the impact with the Vegas shooting, right? So that they really relied not just on their small group in that one cohort, but they had the other cohort as well to rely on. And I saw all of the students just deal with term 3 and all these other issues that come up for them in a much stronger manner, because they're not just siloed into that little tiny group. So they have great relationships with their instructors. They know that program associates are there for them right away. And their program heads, their instructors, and each other, and then going out from there. So we really try to build on those relationships.
Yes, I think that's an excellent observation too, is that there's a real gift to the cohort model, but sometimes that can be limiting. And I think something that we do often think about in student services is how do we bridge some of the connections and relationships outside of the cohort. So it's cool to hear those creative ideas of how you're doing that within your program. Thanks.
So our group, we were mostly talking about the relationship piece, and one of the things that we came up with was signage, sort of advertising for the student services piece, putting posters up or putting them on the, just stuff on the TV screens, which I know you do already, but putting up posters in places where the students are, in the cafeteria, in the library, at the rec center, saying, hey, we have this thing, we have these services, are you feeling like this? Here's the contact information, just in the places where the students are. Because, though your offices are mostly in the library, we don't have any signs that say, hey, we have a TV, but, we don't have a poster in the computer lab that says, hey, look, students. And some of our students probably don't know. Most of our staff doesn't know, that's for sure. I mean,
yeah, the awareness piece is ongoing.
Yeah,
for sure. Those are some good ideas. Yeah. Really, one more comment, and then I'll make sure Gemma has time to get into her content.
Well, I was just going to flip that over and say, is there any way to build in, if 1 in 5 students in some way is affected, can you not build a banner in a Moodle course that would permanently be in the template for all Moodle courses that highlights some things?
Reminding of counseling services?
Yeah, sort of what we think of as a banner, right? It lives there forever.
That's an interesting idea. There's conversations around making sure the team coach is included in all Moodle courses, so maybe there's more we could do to integrate it.
Or that academic strategist, that's, more comfortable term for the
right. People. It is, yes, sometimes it's a better starting point. That's really good ideas. Good, well, we've captured some of those, and if you do feel comfortable to leave your little stickies on that flip chart, that would be great. And like I say, we'll continue to build these out and have a second workshop more focused on this topic in the new year. And for now, we'll make sure that Douglas's questions get addressed, and Gemma will come up and share some thoughts around how to respond to students who might be showing signs of mental health challenges.
Thank you. I know many of the faces here, but I will just quickly introduce myself because I realized that even though I've been connected to the university for many years, I spent a lot of my time necessarily behind a closed door, not really getting out in public much. So my name is Gemma Fraser, and I work as a counsellor, as a backup to Sarah, and I'm working as an academic strategist to sort of help students who are struggling sort of mostly with the academic kind of side of stress. And recently as well, I put another hat on, and I'm one of the team coaches. So I'm around, and it's so great to see some faces. One of the things that we were talking about, that we spent a lot of time talking about is, there's lots of things each of us can do to create healthy learning environments and healthy spaces at home for us, for our families. And no matter what we do, sometimes there is going to be distress in people's lives, right? It doesn't matter how healthy we create the environment or try to create the environment. Sometimes there's going to be distress. Sometimes there's going to be stress, and sometimes there's going to be true like crisis, as we would think of it in the counselling world. So today we would just want to spend a little bit of time on this because I think this is where people get really sort of, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do, and it's real, right? I was reading on a website just recently this little thing that said, if someone tripped over and fell and sprained their ankle, most of us would have some idea of what to do. But if someone has a panic attack in front of us, most of us are pretty clueless as to what to do. And I think that's kind of a scary space to be in. And I'd like to sort of shed some light on that in terms of what you can do in those moments. So on this sheet here, you can see we've sort of divided up, and I think someone said before, we're thinking linear, I can't say that word, in a linear fashion. And mental health is really not linear. We're all over the place, really, from day to day, moment to moment, and time to time. And just remember that we hope that crisis is short-lived if it gets to that point. Most of what you'll see in students will be at the bottom here, this sort of stress level. So they might be sort of, a little bit anxious because there's a test coming up. They might be feeling, exhausted because they've been up all night writing the paper that just won't come out, even though they know what they want to write. So they might not be really that focused in class because their brain is somewhere else, thinking about the relationship that's just gone south, or some other stress outside of life. So that's most of what you'll see in life at the university. Kick it up a notch, and we get to students who are in distress. You might see some more tears. You might see them sort of really not present at all. Maybe they just disappear online for a little while, or the papers they're handing in aren't up to the level that you would expect. So that's a big distress. Kick it up a notch even further, and we talk about someone who's in a real crisis. And when we're talking about crisis, we're talking about, usually we're talking about worries around harm to themselves or to other people. So we might talk about, obviously the big one is suicide. Might talk about sort of threats to other people like, oh my gosh, I hate so-and-so and I'm going to do all sorts of horrible things to their being. It might be really disruptive to the classroom, that they're just not in control. So those are sort of crisis moments. So the stress stuff is okay. We would like to do better at reducing that for students. The distress, we have to start to worry a little bit more. And obviously the crisis, I would just encourage you as staff and faculty not to go it alone when it gets to that crisis point. So, no, wait, other way. There we go. So here, this sheet just shows you some signs and symptoms. I think it's on the handout, so I won't go spend too much time on this. But we sort of, when we think about the school context, we think about signs and symptoms sort of falling under three things you could look for. So there's the academic aspect. So maybe they're typically an A student and they start handing stuff in that's like, oh, maybe a B- or a C. That would be sort of, maybe it's just they're not getting the concept, or maybe there's something else going on. Or maybe they are really not present during their class presentation. Maybe they just hate presentations, but maybe there's something else going on. So it's just little cues or signs or symptoms that you can sort of attune to start to check out whether there's something going on or not. Then there's the psychological piece. So it might be that they're a bit cranky with the people around them in their cohort. They start to sort of fight with each other and bicker. Or maybe they're crying often or leaving class or feeling really just edgy. You know, you see people are just a bit edgy sometimes. That's something, again, to attune to. And then there's the physical side of it. So maybe they look like they haven't slept in 3 weeks. Or maybe you notice that they're starting to lose weight. You know, they're often crying, again, physical tears, or maybe just really disoriented and things like that. So those are sort of the components things that you can start to attune to that might be clues that something's going on. Now, the point I want to make here is that just because you notice some of these things doesn't necessarily mean that there's some psychological or mental illness going on. It's something for you to think about, and it's a good time to check things out. And I'm going to talk about how to check those out. But if, for example, I was crying, you know, and my grandmother had just passed away, well, I'm not going through mental illness right now. I'm crying because my grandma passed away. And the tears make perfect sense, right? So sometimes it's good to just check in and find out what's going on to figure out, is it really something to be really worried about, or is it just something maybe a cup of tea and a listening ear would really help with, okay? So did you?
Well, I was just going to say that too. In a lot of the programs, there's a lot of introspection and self-awareness that can bring tears. Tears are more normal than not. So it's also looking at kind of coursework and how quickly is it going to blow over.
Yeah, absolutely. Context means a lot, right? Without the context, I think that we don't really necessarily know how best to respond. Okay. So what we'd like to share with you is this alert model for supporting students. And I think some of you have seen this before. I think Michelle Underdown and Sarah sort of did a workshop before, but it's a good thing to go over again. I think, again, if we think about, you know, someone who trips and sprains their ankle, we know how to respond. But if it's you know, a panic attack or someone's crying, we don't necessarily know how to respond. So, but the two are actually quite similar, right? So if someone trips and falls, you say, "Gosh, I just saw you trip and fall. Are you okay?" So it's acknowledging what you saw and acknowledging why you're hovering over the top of them. So when it comes to a distressing symptom or a sign that you might be noticing, you first start with acknowledging what you've observed. So it might be, well, I noticed that you haven't been online at all for the last 2 weeks. So just acknowledge what behavior you're seeing. Or I'm seeing that you look a little tired these days. Okay, so acknowledge what you're seeing first is a really good starting point. And then your next job is to really listen. And I loved when Asma was here this morning and she said, you know, we really need to at times go from the head and switch to the heart. And I think this is the piece that I can't emphasize enough, is when you're checking in with someone about, you know, something you've seen, try to think about, instead of approaching it from a cognitive perspective, but from the heart. Because if you go from the heart, it makes it A, much easier to listen, and B, much easier for the person to be a little bit vulnerable and tell you what's really going on. Because what we don't want is for someone to say, no, I'm fine. You're an instructor. I'm not telling you what's going on, which is a common response, okay? So just try to remember that. If you can, listen from the heart. Try to engage the student. So, without being pushy, of course, but try not to let them brush you off with, no, I'm fine, which tends to be a common response. I'm fine, thanks. So just try to check in, try to engage, try to listen to what's going on. Because when you listen and you engage, then you have a better chance to understand the context. Okay? Is this someone who is crying and distressed because, like my example before, their grandmother had passed away? Or is this person crying and distressed, but we're not really quite sure whether the pieces are making sense with this much distress, in which case we probably want to move on to the next part, which is the referral. Okay, so if it doesn't make sense, if they're not able to calm down, if they're looking like they could use some extra support, then you want to think about referring to someone in student services. So oftentimes the starting point for that would be counselling services, and we try to be as friendly and open doored as we can, and so just, you know, it often helps for students. Sorry, I'll back that up. even though we do a really good job of trying to let people know that counselling does not mean you're broken. It does not mean there's something wrong with you. There's still, we really accept that there is a lot of stigma around going to counselling for help. So one of the things that I encourage you to do is when you're talking about coming to see someone, maybe just ditch the word counselling altogether and just talk about, we've got these lovely women, lovely people that you can come and talk to on campus. The name's Gemma, the name is Sarah. Why don't we see if we can just go find them, or maybe I'll send an email to them and just invite them into that, but take out the counselling piece just in case there's preconceived ideas about how rubbish that can be. Okay? Yes.
You said women.
Yes.
Do you have any males on staff?
No. In the whole of student services, I think we have Viral, Kyla.
Yeah, we used to. We did for a short period of time. Well, not for a short, for a number of years. We had a contract with the counselor, and then he retired. And we haven't successfully, Sarah and I have kind of battled around with some names, but we haven't found another individual. So we do, and actually right now, unfortunately, one of our colleagues is on a medical leave, but Chris Brown, up until this summer, was another person that has a coaching background, advising background, and has been a resource. So at this stage, we do have Viral, who's an advisor in a different capacity, but we don't have reference to email at this date or stage. I think Sarah was speaking to this a bit earlier, that we do have a community of colleagues to call on, and we do have reference points within the external community as well. So yeah, within the religious sector, we have other colleagues at other institutions that we can call on to if we really need to make that match happen.
It's interesting because I think that in student services, we tend to be caring people. I know I'm grossly stereotyping here, so forgive me, but we tend to be caring people, which has tended towards the female entering into that roles. And I think about financial aid and awards. We don't have a male. I can imagine what that must be like for some guys to come to talk to a female to say, hey, I can't put the pieces together economically. That must be, really difficult as well. And I think the same with accessibility services. It can be really difficult for men to come and talk to accessibility services about the fact that they're not able to function typically like other people. So I think that it is something that we've attuned to, not just for counselling services, but as a whole. It really is something. And then I'm also quick not to presuppose that something will be a barrier. So we could look at age, we can look at cultural pieces, we can look at gender, we can look at this so many ways. And I think that the more diverse we create our supports, the better able we are to support people. So it's not just a male-female thing. I think it's a real issue across the board. So taking away the word counsellor, because that does trigger some people, but just creating a space for you to be able to refer to student services. If it seems like it's a crisis, the care team is there as well. As we said before, Kyla's on the phone at the moment as the on-call person. So that's a really great resource too. If it happens to be late at night and you happen to connect with a student who's in crisis, perhaps they start to talk about some really dark thoughts and you start to worry that maybe there's some suicide ideation going on there, then trust your instincts and reach out to the care team, because you shouldn't have to support that by yourself. It can be a really scary place to be. And so talk to us, talk to student services. We really, you can try and refer students, and sometimes they're really open to it and say, yeah, great, absolutely, where do I sign up? Other times they may not be that eager, which is fine too. But I just encourage you folks not to be shy about it. You don't have to necessarily tell us the names of the students if you don't want to, but reach out to us and we can sometimes think about other ways that we might be able to get a message to a student so that they can get the support they need, whether it's sort of a blanket email out to the whole cohort just as a general check-in or something. So do talk to us if you're worried about a student. And talk to us as well, because one of the things that you really should be doing is trusting your instincts. We also know it's really hard to trust your instincts sometimes. So talk with us about the students that you're worried about. Let us know what's going on so we can help sort of say, yeah, really, your fears are valid, and let's work together as a team to figure out how best to support the student. Or, well, that sounds like, no, something you really don't have to worry so much about, but maybe let's just keep a finger on the pulse with that student for a period of time. Yes.
When would you go directly to a team coach and when would you not, or is it all up? If you go to a team coach, could they just immediately refer back to counseling if it's not their area?
When would staff go to team coach, do you mean?
Like refer a student to the team coach and where's the line?
Yeah, it's blurry. So I think perhaps the best way to approach it is if it looks on the surface like a team coach, a team issue, like it's really presenting itself in the team, then the team coach should be the first port of call. Absolutely, because the coaches can do a lot to get that sort of like dynamic back on track, and then oftentimes the stress dissolves. The difficulty comes when there's some external stressor from out here that's impacting someone that's bringing that into the team environment but isn't necessarily sharing it with the team. That could be tricky for a team coach. So the team coach can do what they can, but then perhaps maybe suggest that an individual also perhaps has a larger conversation outside of it. So, yeah. When sometimes in counselling sessions too, we do encourage back the other way. Someone comes to us and says, oh my gosh, I hate my team, it's such a struggle, da da da. We refer back and say, have you talked to your team coach yet? Yeah.
Services too, like that's a very strong collaborative relationship, so that's maybe helpful too.
Yes. I was just going to ask, if we know that the student has been through something traumatic, had a death in the family, or is going through a divorce, or what have you, is it considered a confidentiality breach if we were to reach out to you and say, here's the student, here's their name, please reach out? Do you ever get students that are not happy that we've shared that information?
So there's lots of answers to that question, because there's lots of questions there. So I'm going to leave some space for confidentiality a little bit later, but in answer to your question, there's, again, a couple of ways you can do it. You could reach out to us and let us know that you have a student that you're worried about. And, you know, maybe if you don't feel comfortable sharing the name at first, you can just let us know what's going on, and then we can collaborate around what can we do to support that student.
I have no issue sharing the name.
No, sorry, but you're thinking about...
Referring them to contact you, or is it okay for you to contact them?
Sorry, Kyla, you look like you're just itching to say something, and I'm...
Well, we can flip it both ways. We've worked in many times with program staff too, where we can say, let's help you craft with communication. When you can send that out to the student, let them know about this community that cares about them. So since they've disclosed that you're the point of contact to whom they disclose that information, then you can share out and say, hey, I want to make sure you're aware of these resources here, 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 here. We also have some very neutral ways of communicating now. Like Marlene was saying, we've done other kinds of olive branch communications where we just remind students in different gentle ways about services. So we can flip it so that we don't have to breach confidentiality.
So it's never one-on-one, like, hey, I heard you lost so-and-so, wanted to make sure you're okay. Never?
Sometimes.
It honestly depends too on that. Like if you're having a question, if it's just somebody's probably having a bad day, can I get your contact information? Can you help me craft a message so that I can send it to them versus, you know what, this is potentially a student that I'm very, very worried about, and so let's talk about how we might do some more active or proactive intervention. So we all also have signed confidentiality agreements. We all care about our students. And we all have that administrative need to share information when we are worried about people too. So if there's a point where you really are worried about a student, and you can feel comfortable sharing the name, certainly with us. And we have on other occasions too, and I was going to say the answer to that question is probably all over the board, but I've had students, I'm in school tourism, go, wow, we love the fact that our program staff shared that with you, right? Like we've actually had students come back and say, you know, like some staff members that have done that, right? That staff member loves me so much that they shared that information with counseling services. The counselor contacted me, and so we can actually spin it in a way that really shows that we're caring, creative, and accountable as an institution.
And we try to take if you were to come to us with that, we do try to have a conversation around who is the student, right? And have who is the student, and how are they likely to respond to this, and case by case. Yep. And the other thing to remember too with confidentiality is it's broad. I mean, it's specific for counselling. There's some really specific rules around it for counselling. But at the end of the day, I guess what I would encourage all of you to think about if you're questioning that is, we always want to try to get the right information to the right people at the right time. And so if you use that as your guiding light, then usually you won't go too far wrong. Okay, so the right information to the right people at the right time, which obviously means, you know, you don't chat about your students who are in distress when you're over dinner with your friends. You probably don't necessarily have to talk with everybody in the department about it. You don't talk to other students, although sometimes maybe checking in with a student who's a friend and saying, hey, have you heard from so-and-so lately? I'm a little bit worried about them. This can be, you know, so that's sort of the way that you would approach it from your sort of lay perspective. Does that help answer? Not really, I know. It's murky. It is murky, for sure. And we do it case by case. Yeah.
Just with respect to other outreach we have done in a general sense, we have a student engagement team, and they're very neutral. And so they can also send out a note of, you know, our purpose is to engage community, and it's been shared with us that one of your faculty members or one of your program staff has identified that maybe you might benefit from some connection to some other resources and supports. Want to make sure you're aware of them, and then they can list all of them. So if you think you may have some curiosity around a learning disability, you might want to talk to somebody in accessibility services, or like we don't maybe go to that great extent of detail, but these are all the services we provide. If you have questions about them, we can help point you towards them. And so we can use student engagement in that way and have quite a bit.
Yes. So I just adding to Kellyanne's question there. I've actually asked the team, the care team before, to do a random check-in. When I've actually used it a few times, and 9 times out of 10, I end up seeing something coming from accessibility services that they're taking care of them afterwards. I mean, they always respond and say, no problem, I've reached out, but it reinforces to me it was the right decision. I may not share everything that the student shared with me, but it's been enough to heighten my concern that I don't want to go home and, you know, when there's a potential issue. So I really appreciated the care team has done several random check-ins over the last couple of years for me, for some of our students. And I was going to say something else.
So we'll come back to you.
Sorry.
Yes.
We have time for another question. This is Ivan Kafka, frequently our remaining MRP major research project, and all of the thesis students. And we do have a high tendency, what's that? For students to disappear, drop out. Some even in the phase of being on a medical leave of absence. And it seems to me that I think the deal was, so it's left in accessibility's hands. But I guess my question is around the timing. During that period, is there any contact with Royal Roads with that student on a leave? How do we best prepare for them to come back? Still, it's in the hands of accessibility services. I don't know, that's just sort of a gray area for me.
It is gray as well.
Ready to come back, are they really ready to come back? Or do they need further
medical
support?
clearance
Yeah.
to say that they're ready to be students again.
Yeah, and then we just carry on as if they were 100%.
We advise them to contact their program office to build the schedule again for them, and to contact us if they need any assistance building a success plan. So if they failed or if it got to a situation where there was barriers that we need to consider before they can return, we want to make sure that those are in place so that they have better chances of success coming back.
So you do more than just wait for the doctor's okay?
Well, we limit our contact with students because we want them to be focusing on getting well during their medical leave of absence, but in the month leading up to when the medical leave expires, that's when we start to get engaged with the students, make that plan again. Thank you.
And for the major projects, because with my academic strategist hat on, I do a lot of work with those folks who go on medical leaves or keep taking extension after extension. If they go through accessibility services, sometimes they're routed through to me. And one of the things I try to do is to encourage them to get back in contact with the program office, because there is a real disconnect, and we know that that disconnect creates loneliness. It feeds into anxiety, it feeds into depression, feelings of worthlessness. I'm never going to be able to do this, and it doesn't make sense, and I hate this, and it's just not a good. It's not a feel good for anyone. And that accountability piece is missing, so we try to do that as they come back, especially off of medical leave. For me, I send out weekly emails to the students who are on my list who've come through accessibility service, just to try to create that possibility for success, because you're right, like that's a big problem for students. I'm just really aware that we have like 10 minutes left. So I want to just quickly jump through these, and I just want to open up if there's any other particular questions about specific scenarios you might be encountering yourselves that might need some work around. Very briefly, these are the things that if you encounter, you really should be, don't do it alone. Don't do it alone, okay? Do reach out to the care team, especially to reach out to student services. So if there's a reference to suicide from any of the students, then straight away you should be letting us know, and in this instance, names really should be shared. In answer to the question before about are students mad, when it comes to suicide, it's always better to have someone who is mad and alive, right? Period. That's just the way it is. If there's any reference to sexual assault, then again, we should be sharing information just to make sure we can keep everybody safe and well supported. And that goes for the broader community as well. So if a student is talking about harming someone else, then really, again, that's not something you keep to yourself. That's not something as counsellors we keep to ourselves. It is something that we share so that we can make sure that everybody stays, to the best of our abilities, everybody stays safe. If someone's talking about harm to themselves, especially including drug and alcohol abuse, not use but abuse, or any other kind of self-harm, then again, don't do it by yourselves, because it's tough, it's difficult, and you really should have other supports around you. Or if it's highly disruptive behaviour in the classroom as well, don't try and do that by yourselves. Do reach out for extra supports, which isn't on this slide, and I really, it's remiss of us not to have this, but you folks, any of these things, they're really big. And it may not feel really big in the moment because you're probably going to go into, oh my gosh, I'm coping with it mode, but they're really big. Even for those of us who've been working in the field for 20 years, if someone talks to me about hurting themselves or hurting someone else, it's scary. It really is. So know that it's okay to be scared, know that it's okay not to know what to do, know that every time it's going to feel a little bit different and there might be some uncertainty. And know that you should be reaching out to get yourself some support. Because I think it's really common, we do so much supporting of other people. But if you're supporting, especially in any of these situations, I really, really, really encourage you to get some support for yourself. So call the, call the EAP provider, or if you have another counsellor that you use regularly, or if you don't feel comfortable doing that, talk to your manager or talk to Kyla. Sorry, Kyla, but you talk to everybody so nicely, so. But yeah, just take care of yourselves in all this too. And back to the beginning, trust your instincts. That's the most important thing you can do when we're supporting our students, is trust your instincts. I always like to think there's no such thing as over-caring most of the time. Probably is such a thing as over-caring. My mum over-cares. Still. But generally speaking, there's not such a thing as over-caring. We're better off over-caring than under-caring, especially if we shift from our heads to our hearts, like Aston was saying this morning. So I invite you to do that. Just trust your instincts and just care, okay? We talked about the care team, and that's on this list of resources that we handed out previously. We talked about confidentiality. Yeah, any other questions about confidentiality before I?
Oh, sorry.
No, it's great.
Waiting for a break. Yeah, we had an incidental in the last few months. A student was being very disruptive, and there were concerns about abuse on the phone. And we thought the issue was over. It had been referred to student services. That person then took it upon themselves to then call the program office randomly and start the whole thing again. But some staff weren't aware that that communication should not have happened. So is there any way that we can be, program staff can be notified in confidence or somehow that we're not to engage in conversation or something with a particular person if they actually had some action taken through your area. Does that even make sense?
Yeah, it does, and it's again one of those really case-by-case situations. So from a counselling perspective, we won't share details of what goes on in our counselling room. So that is just one piece. I'm not to put it back on the program. It sounds like that would come from the program and be filtered down. If some staff are dealing with the issue, is what I mean.
If that's the case, can we do that? If it is left up to the program to advise each other.
I think so. If there's no details being shared in regards to personal details about the student.
Sort of a no contact rule or something.
Yeah, basically just that, for whatever reasons that don't need to be discussed, that we're not to engage. Or if the student does contact you, what should you do in that case too? I think that's really important. Not just don't talk to them, but where would you refer? What message would you give to that student?
Because I would be curious too as to why the student was bringing it up again in a different avenue. Like it sounds like some of their needs haven't been met, so I'd be curious about, not curious about the content, but curious about what needs are not met. So it would be for the staff, it would be approaching it from sort of not paying too much attention to the details, but paying attention to the underlying emotions and feelings that are going with it, if that makes sense. So it's not because they're bringing it up again in a different context.
Students, so they're coming at it with no knowledge, trying to help, trying to listen. Really, that shouldn't have been going on.
Yeah, it sounds like a tricky one, and perhaps we could, if it's an ongoing or things like that do come on, I think that is something that we could help navigate if we're aware of it. But I don't know if we are. Yeah. Any other questions about confidentiality? Yes.
To comment on that idea that we just talked about, for some of the students, especially the international students, this is the only point of contact that they really have. You sever that tie, and there's no other place for them to go, except move up the list. I wonder if severing the tie or announcing that this is a person you don't talk to anymore is really a great idea.
Right.
If we don't owe it to just the concept of humanity, that we treat every call as an individual call, individual event, let them refer through to the people who can handle it, and let you guys solve the residual issues that the rest of us don't know about.
Right. It's a really nice way of looking at it, and certainly crisis lines work exactly from that premise, is that someone can call in every night with the same stuff every day if they want. And there's a reason for that, and I guess that's what I'm thinking, there's a reason. So be curious about not the content, but curious about what's underneath the content. And I think that's moving from the head to the heart again. Yeah, good. Gwen. Sorry.
Thank you. Just to be cognizant of time, awesome discussion. And if you have questions moving forward, we're available at counselling@royalrose.ca or Gwen Camden at royalrose.ca to talk about any of the questions you might have that you haven't been able to discuss today, or you're welcome to attend future sessions. Now, we have a lot of the information that we've talked about today as a permanent resource online on the counselling site, so you can pull up that handout that we gave you today. That's always on there, and you're going to find new resources in that site soon as well. Yeah, we're just going through a project to redesign our website. We're so excited about that. Better stuff, a little bit more reach out and stuff. And so next steps for this, because today we talked about how we currently help students. And next steps in this next coming year is we're going to be looking at, as Sarah mentioned earlier the mental health strategy, so campus-wide. So what can we do to make the university thriving in a healthy stress zone? So we're going to be looking at the policies, how we work with teams in classrooms, so all of those things that the community can do to make it a healthy stress environment for our students. And so that'll be our next workshop, so keep your eyes peeled on that one. And we'll probably do it in a series as well, since I know it's going to be popular. Any questions before we wrap up here today? Thank you so much for your interest in student mental health. It means a lot to us that you're here today and that you care, and that's why we love Royal Road so much. So thank you.